really kind of trying to follow this one constant rule we always had of things in Wonderland needing to be inspired by experiences or sights or sounds that Alice would have had in her real life. And so that's where a lot of the inspiration for, say, a teapot as a weapon came from this time around. The next question is from Harley Quinn. It's, did the culture in Shanghai influence the work on the game in any way, whether aesthetically, gameplay, or even the story? Yeah, you know, being here is a major influence every day. And it's for the people who work and live in the city. It's one of the biggest and busiest and craziest cities on the planet. It also happens to be a very, very interesting time to be in China. You know, as many people know these days, China is really on the rise. This is a time of a lot of optimism and change for the country. And so it happens to be that it's a great time to be in China doing anything creative, because there are these revolutions taking place across all industries. You know, if it's manufacturing or banking or film or arts or games, you name it. The landscape here is rapidly shifting, and people are really looking for ways to prove to the world that they can produce content on a level of quality that you know is really new for this country. And so that meant that coming to work every day, the people in the studio are really looking to put their best out there. And so there's a lot of drive, a lot of pride about the idea of a game this big being built here in China. And in fact, at the end of the day, what the team was able to do is the first ever AAA console title that was built from start to finish in China by a Chinese team. And so that that influenced everybody's feelings and commitment to the project quite a lot. We also ended up with a lot of international, you know, expats working on the game who came from Nepal and France and you know, England and Australia. And so this international group of people mixed in with the locals. And that, of course, comes through in the art style and the story and the presentation of the game. I think the result is quite unique and really only could have come out of a team working here in Shanghai. Next question comes from Jeremy. It's who composed the score for Madness Returns, and how much influence or input do you have on the musical direction of the game? Did this differ from the original? So the original game score was made by Chris Brenna, of course. I think a lot of people know that. He did a fantastic job, and we also invited him to come out to Shanghai to meet with and work with the team here when we began work on Madness Returns. But unfortunately, his obligations to Marilyn Manson and touring with the band meant that he couldn't be full-time on this project. And so our internal sound and composing and design team is headed up by a guy named Jason Tai, and he, working with another guy named Roland Shaw, produced the majority of the music and the sound effects that you find in the game, Jason being the audio director and the primary composer for the project. And he's a really interesting guy. He was born and raised in Malaysia, but went to school, went to university for his music degree in England. And then we were lucky enough to get him to come here to Shanghai to work on the game. And his influence of musical styles and his ability to create different types and genres of music is really amazing. And so when you're going through the game and you're hearing all these different presentations of soundscapes, you know, it's all coming out of Jason's mind, and he did a really great job. He was also backed up by a guy named Marshall Crutcher, who is in San Francisco, and who RJ, again, the other creative lead on the project, RJ and Marshall worked together to get the violin and cello, the more organic pieces that you hear in London, get those recorded. And so everything that came together, we got one track from Chris as a sort of, you know, his sort of gift to the project. Jason did almost all the rest of the music with some support from Marshall. And then in terms of my input on this stuff, I would give them some direction from time to time. Just in terms of music that I liked or music I thought was appropriate for certain sections. Also, I play an instrument myself. I play cello, and so I would give direction to Marshall just in terms of cello pieces and composers from the era that I thought would be appropriate for sort of mimicking their style for inclusion in London. The next question is coming from Inzoff, I guess, E-N-Z-O-F. I don't know, Inzoff. I thought I had a weird name, but anyway. What was more challenging, creating Madness Returns, creating American McGee's Alice with the technology back then, or creating Madness Returns with today's technology? Again, that's a great question, and I think that every era of development has its own challenges, has its own problems. You're always trying to push whatever piece of technology you have to the limit of what's possible with it. And so, where we had a sort of simpler, more limited technology back with the original Alice, we also had a smaller team of only 35 people and a less ambitious goal in terms of size. And, this time around, we have a huge, much bigger engine, and an engine that's much more technically advanced. But we're also throwing at that 150-person team plus a design which is much more ambitious. And so both projects, I think, were equally difficult. And I think that for both projects, the majority of the challenge from the development actually came out of the people, as opposed to the technology or the production. It was really much more about the dynamics that existed between the individuals working on the projects, and that doesn't change regardless of where you are in the world or what technology you're using. The next question comes from Tony. It's what sparked the idea of Alice's hysteria mode, and how do you fit that into the gameplay without breaking the gameplay? This was something that was inspired by the Rage Box, which was present in the first Alice. And in the first Alice, you would pick up this item that you found in the environment from time to time, and it would transform Alice into this kind of beastly, satanic killing machine. And people really loved that. We thought about bringing it back as it was in the first game as an item, but in fact we were worried about it feeling sort of gated, and that people would want to have access to it to be able to carry it around and use it, or that those areas where we presented it would just kind of come off like these killing sprees that you didn't have much control over. And so we finally came to this idea that the hysteria could be a sort of save from the brink of death for Alice. And that's actually a mechanic that's been seen in some other titles that we liked quite a lot. So we thought it was appropriate to sort of re-skin the Rage Box with this functionality. And when it came to the question of balance, it was something that we thought about, but ultimately we thought that the sort of fun that came out of, and the excitement that came out of using the hysteria mode kind of outweighed any concerns we had about it throwing the balance of the game off. The next question comes from Jay, and it is, what was the inspiration or idea for the shrink sense? This really came out of the books. I mean, we knew that we wanted to have her being able to do some more of the things that were read of in the books, like Off With Her Head or Growing Giant. And of course, shrink is one of those things that's very iconic. It's very emblematic of Alice and her experience in Wonderland. And so we immediately started thinking about this as something that would be used by the player almost as frequently as jumping. And once we had it into the game, we were then kind of looking for other ways in which to leverage this ability, be it in combat or with puzzles. And I think it was our creative director, Ben, who came up with this idea that when you shrank down, you would then be able to see things that were hidden to the otherwise the large Alice. And once we started hiding messages in the world and having these invisible platforms that became visible once she was shrunk, there opened up a whole lot of other interesting ways we could tie that into gameplay and puzzles. So the next question has to do with, this is from Damien. It's, why are there butterflies in this game, and does it symbolize something? Well, the butterflies come partly from the caterpillar, his existence in the original books. But also early in the game, we had presented this Veil of Tears, which is the kind of happy, safe, green, lush part of Wonderland that represents Alice's early childhood. And in the Veil of Tears, we had inserted butterflies that were, seen kind of flitting about the scene. And we thought that, as a place for Alice to draw inspiration for a power, that the Vale of Tears being this childish kind of happy place would make a lot of sense. And so we borrowed the butterfly theme. We actually had gone around and around with a number of different ways to visualize that movement, but we kept coming back to the butterflies just because they matched the color of her dress. We liked this kind of blue iridescence from the original dress. We saw them, we kind of preloaded them into Alice's mind in the Vale of Tears. And also they had a connection with the caterpillar and the concept of transformation that comes along with him. The next question comes from Dark and Demented. Out of all the characters encountered in the games, friends and enemies alike, which would be your favorite, least favorite, and most like yourself? It's a good question, very interesting. I usually will answer this just in the kind of quickest, easiest way, which is to say Alice is my favorite character, because this really is her story, and every other character that we see in Wonderland is a function of her mind. It's a piece of her psyche. So the Cheshire Cat represents her id, and the caterpillar represents her ego, and the Mad Hatter may represent another piece of her psychological makeup. So though I like the other characters a lot, I'm always kind of thinking that these are all just facets of her personality. If I had to choose an enemy or a friend that I disliked, or I liked the least for this time around, it would certainly be the Ruin. That is the kind of ooey black, gooey characters that we've brought into the storyline this time, that represent the destruction that is taking over Wonderland. What they represent and what they're doing is pretty abominable. So of course I'm gonna say that those would be my least favorite. And finally, most like myself. That's a tough one, because I kind of see Alice as a character unto herself, and like I said, I see the characters that live in Wonderland as all being facets of her and her personality. So I can't say that I'm in this game or that I see any portion of myself in this game. I actually think Alice is much cooler and more interesting than I am. So I guess I might pick some random guy walking on the streets of London to be most like me. The next question comes from Neoyak, and his or her question is, I noticed that the Hatter and his minions are goblinoid creatures. What inspired that choice? Well, the Hatter design, as with Alice's design, the Cheshire Cat's design, all of these designs, they all go back to the original game, and they go back to a process whereby we knew we were going to make this twisted, sort of dark presentation of Alice, but we were really struggling with what the characters were going to look like, and we had a stack of artwork, a foot thick, of different representations of Alice and the Cheshire Cat and the Mad Hatter. And it really wasn't until there were two guys, one guy named Norm and one guy named Terry, who they did some really interesting pencil sketches to define these characters, and it just came out. It was just obvious to us all at that moment that that's what these designs needed to be about. And I believe it was Terry Smith, who did the sketch for the Mad Hatter that ultimately defined who he was. And so I think back then that the Hatter was probably a little bit less goblinoid, as you put it, and probably a bit more mechanical. But this time around, when we came up with the concept of the Madcaps, which are his minions, they definitely took on a more goblin-like appearance, and that was really just by way of us making smaller miniature versions of the Hatter. This is a question from Mr. Green. In the first game, we could see a lot of places taken from the books, and also a lot of the characters, I guess, from the books. Has it been difficult to make a new game and make it look all new, avoiding the feeling of repetition of the same places and characters? Well, I think that the concept of all of these locations and characters is one of the beauties and one of the strengths of the IP. It's one of the things that makes working with it so much fun.